Earth. 1963, living mollusk shells dated 2,300 years old. It's not getting any better. That's 14 years of practice with carbon dating. 1970, they said if a carbon date supports our theories, we put it in the main text. If it does not entirely contradict them, we put it in a footnote. If it's completely out of date, we just drop it. 1971, freshly killed seal dated 1,300 years old. 1975, one part of a mammoth is 40,000 years old, another part's 26,000. It's not working. 1981, it's not working. It has never worked. 1984, living snails, carbon date 27,000 years old. One atheist said, well, yeah, we know why that one didn't work. Okay, then how do you know any of them do work? If you know some of them don't work, how could you possibly prove any of the carbon dates are working? You can't. I mean, in a court of law, they'd laugh at you for bringing in carbon dating. 1992, two mammoths found side by side. One carbon dates 22,000 years old, another one carbon dates 16,000 years old. This is not an exact science, folks. 1996, up at Berkeley University, they used two different dating techniques. They found these bones are 53,000 to 27,000. That's a 96% error. This is not science. This is fairy tale stuff. It gets worse with potassium argon dating. You need video 7 for that one.
I wrote a book called Denying History. It's about the Holocaust deniers. Here's their reasoning. You know, those Holocaust historians used to say that there were 21 death camps. Now they're saying that there's only 6. See? They're wrong. There was no Holocaust. Holocaust historians used to say they gassed people at Dachau. Now they're saying they didn't gas people at Dachau. See? They didn't gas anybody anywhere. This is the same line of reasoning that the evolution deniers use as the Holocaust deniers. In fact, of course, everybody makes mistakes. Errors and fakes have nothing to do with the large body of knowledge to tell us what's actually true about history and the past. The fakes, by the way, and all these errors were exposed not by creationists, but by scientists, because scientists have integrity, and the science itself has a built-in self-correcting machinery that drives it toward better and more accurate facts.
Okay, this is a little bit of a long one. Bacteria appears to be the most efficient reproducing organism on the planet. What is your best evidence for the origin of meiosis, male-female reproduction?
Well, bacteria are the dominant form of life on Earth. And in terms of how they evolved, reproductive methods has to do with really going back to the beginnings of how monomers turn into polymers, how polymers turn into long protein chains, how long protein chains turn into something like RNA, how RNA starts to replicate into DNA, and so on, into a complex reproductive system as we see in bacteria today. We have a fairly good understanding of this in 2 ways. One, through the vast variety of complexity of life today, where you have from simple to complex organisms, and you can see the historical sequence in the different kinds of reproductive methods that there are, and from simple to complex, how they range. That's part 1 of a historical science. The same way that astronomers know how stars evolve by looking at different stars alive, if you will, today at different stages. The second way is looking at the actual cells themselves and the structures within them. These complex eukaryote cells that we're composed of are actually composed of these very simpler prokaryote cells, which we just call these little structures like mitochondria and so forth, that were once themselves free-floating cells that through this symbiotic process of cooperation then coalesced into these larger structures. And so these 2 ways show us, again, historical sciences are by necessary inferential, from which we have to infer from several lines of evidence. We now know this, again, through these independent lines of inquiry that converge to this same conclusion.
Okay, that's a fairy tale, if I ever heard one, because it's here, it must have happened. That's like, you know, the motor slowly evolved to fit into the car, you know, like this. This is a misunderstanding and a gross oversimplification of how complex bacteria are. Bacteria are really complex. People say, don't bacteria become resistant to drugs? That's proof for evolution. Well, that's based on a misunderstanding, okay? Dr. Spettner points out, it's based on a misunderstanding, for the mutations that cause antibiotic resistance still involve information loss. For example, to destroy a bacterium, the antibiotic streptomycin attaches to a part of the bacterial cell called ribosomes. Mutation sometimes causes structural deformity in ribosomes. Since the antibiotic cannot connect with the misshapen ribosome, the bacterium is resistant. But even though this mutation turns out to be beneficial for the moment, it still constitutes a loss of information. No evolution has taken place. The bacteria are not stronger. In fact, under normal conditions with no antibiotic present, they are weaker. Example would be if somebody's going through town handcuffing everybody, hauling them off to kill them, and you don't have any arms. They can't handcuff you. So you survive the purge. Well, that might be beneficial for the moment, but it's still a loss of information and puts you back in the population with armed people, and you're going to be at a disadvantage. So no, bacteria, this bacteria are incredibly designed, not evolved.
Okay. Question for Dr. Hoven. Please explain the claim that 97% of the DNA between humans and chimp are similar.
Can you give me 10 seconds to get the slides up? And then I got 2 minutes, okay. Yeah. DNA between humans and chimps is similar. The claim that the DNA is 97% similar is simply false, okay? It's about 95% according to the most, it used to say 98.6 in the textbooks. Here we go. Here, this textbook says 96% similar between orangutans and humans, 98% similar between chimpanzees and humans, proving a common ancestor 15 million years ago. Actually, Barney Maddox was the leading genome researcher on this project. He said, concerning the genetic differences, the genetic difference between human and his nearest relative, the chimpanzee, is at least 1.6%. That doesn't sound like much, but calculated out, that's a gap of 48 million nucleotides. And a change of only 3 nucleotides is fatal to an animal. There is no possibility of a change. Now they've discovered instead of 98% similar, it's only 95%. So there are millions and millions of differences. Now, if somebody wants to believe that proves common ancestor, they can believe whatever they want, but that's not common sense. I think it proves a common designer. That's why they're similar structures in many things. The Honda Prelude and the Honda Accord are very similar because they both evolved from a skateboard by the same logic. The idea that the DNA code is supposed to prove some kind of evolutionary relationship is ludicrous, okay? The DNA code is so incredibly complex to begin with. I could point out that Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Word have millions of exact lines of code. I mean, they're identical. I can click spell check in Word and I can click spell check in PowerPoint, get the same results. That proves this all evolved from Morse code over billions of years.
Well, whether the DNA sequence similarity is 98.6 or 95.2 or 97 is, in a way, irrelevant. The number keeps changing because that's how science works. It keeps refining and testing and changing and so on. It's one of the beauties of science. There are no final absolute truths. You're not going to read in Genesis what the number is. It's done through DNA. The DNA sequencing themselves is only one measure of commonality between us and the other great apes, and then us and the monkeys, and us and other mammals.